Here's a bay on the south coast of Australia where flotillas of fairy penguins surf ashore every night, where squadrons of short-tailed shearwaters return each year to cliff-top burrows, and where thousands of fur seals have an island home. It's a bay where you can watch elegant royal spoonbills sharing tangled swamps with white ibises, and see hordes of wading birds plundering rich mudflats. Vibrant with life, it's a bay to be enjoyed, a place to relax in. The name of the bay is Western Port. It's bigger than it looks from the air. In fact, to drive round it at a casual speed can take over 2 hours. More importantly, the centre of the second largest city in Australia is only about an hour's drive away. Until 1963, few of the 2.5 million Melburnians knew or cared much about this bay. The sudden arrival of industry was at first welcomed locally. But then, as the impact of the invasion registered, opinion divided in the once quiet town of Hastings. The threat to the whole character of Western Port Bay started a conservation crusade in the heart of Melbourne. In late 1972, the government of Victoria responded. Further industrial development was halted. A major scientific study of the bay was initiated, a study of worldwide importance. And, strangely, this old barge was a key centre of the $2 million investigation. Moored in the midst of Melbourne, thousands of litres of clean seawater are pumped through its aquaria every day for animals brought from Western Port Bay. For in this and other laboratories, the study initially focused on the high quality of the water of the bay and the diversity of life dependent on it. For the first time in the world, here was an opportunity to learn how a relatively undeveloped bay functions and then to plan its future. I've found that if you ask anyone about Western Port Bay, the chances are that unless they fish or sail, they won't even have a clue where the place is. Or if they do know, they'll tell you about its gluey mud or its mosquito-ridden salt marshes and swamps. Such basic reactions are a reflection of that general attitude to wetlands and the seashore, as being as much an empty desert as the most arid part of the interior of Australia. But as with that desert, and with most deserts, it's really a case of appearances being deceptive. Just take a look along this tide line. I'm most at home on a British beach, so it's unusual things that catch my eye here. No doubt, had my earliest seaside holidays been here, I'd have memories of lobbing these sausage blubbers at long-suffering mates, and I might have missed looking inside and seeing the tiny flickering specks, each a larva of the snail that laid this jelly egg mass. It's a beachcomber's joy to find at every step evidence of the variety of animal and plant life that comes out of this bay. But is it animal or is it plant? The sandy skeletons of sponges give little away. But there's no doubt about seaweed or the animal qualities of the scavenging sandhoppers hiding in its cool dampness. There are sandy shores here, and there are these black basalt shells of rock, gouged by the waves and pockmarked with salty pools brimful of shore life. At first sight, these could be British rock pools, but although they look familiar, the inhabitants differ in detail. I'm told they're nowhere near as well known as their counterparts in the northern hemisphere, where marine science has been in full swing for a century or more. And the cool waters of Western Port lack the coral glamour of the barrier reef. Yet the dramas of what eats what and the delights of the diversity of shape, movement and colour give this world of crustaceans, mollusks and worms a glamour and glitter of its own. To float a ship, any water will do. To swim in, it should have no harmful bacteria. But if a bay like this is to support a complex web of life, the quality of water draining from the hills overland to it should be uncontaminated, and so should the water entering it from the sea. This former vast swamp at the north end of the bay was drained in the 1890s. The ducks and geese left, and dairy cattle grazed on British grasses. The way we use this land, whether it's for housing or for agriculture, can seriously affect water running to the bay. It seems almost a miracle that the creeks are so unpolluted when the surrounding land has changed so much since this coast was discovered almost 2 centuries ago. Captain Cook did not discover Australia. This Dutch map existed 100 years before him. Cook did fill in the east coast, but no one knew about the strait between the continent and Van Diemen's Land until Matthew Flinders and George Bass explored the unknown south coast. In 1798, Bass sketched his eye view of what he called the Western Port. It was as far west as he and 6 men in a rowing boat could reach. Into a new world of strange trees and unfamiliar animals came the first settlers. They were perhaps frightened by the nocturnal stealth of the possum, and it's hard to relate the guttural night noises of the koala with the cuddly creature we know so well. So they were quick to clear the alien bush for grazing and groomed the landscape into a European patchwork that made them feel at home. Short-tailed shearwaters were killed for food and oil, and the burrows were robbed of their eggs. They called them mutton birds, and the plunder of their colonies is only a part of a history of the general exploitation of Western Port's wildlife. Sealers were ruthless. In 1813, one gang killed 739 in just 4 days. Whiting and mullet were fished. Fishing villages kept Aboriginal names like Turin and Tyab, or took nostalgic European labels like San Remo, fentanyl, and cows. Steaming into cows came the growing numbers of holidaymakers. It became the playground of Melbourne. The sheltered waters of Western Port are increasingly in demand. 7 men in a rowing boat discovered this bay. Today, 250,000 people come here every summer to find a place in the sun. The fairy penguin's eye view of Western Port is the showbiz dazzle that welcomes them back from the sea. They are the world's smallest penguin. Over 200,000 visitors a year witness their floodlit progression towards their burrows, where they'll regurgitate a meal of half-digested fish for the family.
So just stand still now, please. Stand still.
Penguins and visitors get a little under each other's feet now, but there are plans afoot to improve this situation, and as a wildlife spectacle on tap, it takes some beating. On tap, too, is a distant view of a remnant of a once mighty population of Australian fur seals. 20 cents in the slot, and you can imagine yourself out among the 5,000-strong colony. Close up, the smell here is pretty powerful, so it's hoped that closed-circuit television will give visitors sufficient eyeball-to-eyeball contact, which is better for the seals. Inevitably, people want holiday homes round this bay, though the view of the rooms is seldom as attractive as the view from them. There are commuters living in this rural setting who travel daily into the city, and the permanent residents, including fruit growers and farmers, number some 45,000. But how many more can Western Port cope with? How much of this sort of overspill from Melbourne can the bay absorb? For some years, Western Port was recognised as potentially one of the 6 best deep-water ports in the southern hemisphere, and arguably the best in Australia. A 100,000-ton ship can approach close to a great deal of cheap, flat land. But industry inflated the prices. Traditionally, industry is associated with belching fumes, a raked landscape, ear-splitting din, and hideous streams of liquid filth. But times do change. Technology does advance. At this steel mill, they'll tell you with pride that the water they clean up before emptying it into the bay is cleaner than that on tap to drink. The steel mill and the refinery are subject to rigorous pollution controls, and they can afford to operate them. The Western Port Environmental Study is concerned that future industries and expanding towns may not be able to maintain those standards. This is not pollution, but part of the Western Port study in action. The green dye is fluorescein. It'll slowly disappear. But for a few hours, the spreading patch can be watched. As it slowly disperses, samples are taken at regular intervals for analysis. The particles of dye drift, and their behavior resembles the movement of particles of water. But the dye is visible and can be photographed from the air. It takes a computer to handle the information. A major aim of the study is to make what scientists call a mathematical model of Western Port Bay's water system. For simplicity, the computer plots here the movement of one particle of water with one tide. Ultimately, plotting all movements over long periods builds a complex picture of the real system. The experimenters also want to know how much water enters and leaves the bay and how long it stays inside. This radar reflector shows up the drogue on radar screens on land, and the scientists watch them move. Alternatively numbered polystyrene floats are dropped. The position of each is revealed by radar plotting a helicopter. Results so far show that after each tide, only a little new water stays in the bay, and it may take as long as 60 days to go round.